Okay, students, I wanted to make a little video about some of the practice problems so that you remember a little of the details about how I taught you how to work the problems. So, hey, let's get to it. Okay, so remember, to solve an equation like this, we multiply both sides by the common denominator. Same thing here, same thing here, same thing here. Now, good question here. What would the common denominator be here? Well, I have an x and a 2x, so it must be 2x. Now here you have binomial factor, okay? So remember to include that in your common denominator. Here's one with two different factors, but the common denominator would be both of those factors. Again, here's another rational equation, okay, right? Equation with a rational expression. This is very straightforward here, solving for a letter or a literal equation. Now remember, here they want you to solve for n squared, so obviously you're going to have to manipulate that. Let's get a couple questions here. Now this mixture problem is a lot like the problem we did yesterday or Monday. And remember, I showed you two different ways you could set it up. Please look at your notes. Please look at the video I made on that so that you get that down. Now, I noticed on question 14, it is talking about simple interest, and we did not spend a lot of time on that, but I did give you the formula on that. I probably will do that problem, maybe in class if you need to see that problem done, so that you feel comfortable with that. All right, let's see. This is a motion problem, so this one looks like it's pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't take that long for you to do. Here's a problem here about cars that are 261 miles apart and travel toward each other. So that problem, you know, if you need help, ask me. We'll do it in class. You just have to get a good understanding of the setup of that problem. Then once you get your equation, it's really no big deal. Okay, now here's some questions about I. You know, I did that a lot in the Navy with I, Captain, and all of that. But remember, the key to these problems are the square root of -1 is I, okay, I. So, right, this would be I times radical 49, or 7I, okay? Keep that in mind. And so what you wouldn't do is use your simplifying radical skills and work those problems. Now, remember, I to the 40th, I gave you that little graphic organizer to review that. That should be pretty easy to do. All right, now these are manipulating complex numbers, very straightforward. Remember, I times I is I squared, which is -1. Solve the equation by the method of your choice. So these are quadratics. Now remember, whenever you take the square root in an equation, you have to include plus and minus on the other side. So be mindful of that. All right, now here's a problem here. Quadratic formula probably would be good. So make sure that you know the quadratic formula. Okay. Speaking of knowing formulas, it's very important for you to know the formulas. The department has a rule. I shared this with you later. No formulas on the board, or bringing them to class. Nothing. Okay. So make sure you know them. Very important. Here's some more rational equations here. Pretty straightforward. I'll try to do one of these, live with you in class or in a video. Now notice over here on the right side, this trinomial should be factored, and it'll help you understand what the common denominator is. Now this is extremely important. You remember the basics about the absolute value. So you're going to have 6z minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 7, right? And then you're going to solve those two separate equations. I'll try to do an example, just a quick reminder for you. Now here's an equation with a radical. So what you got to do is put them in Guantanamo. You got to isolate the radical, okay, and square both sides so you can get a way around finding the solution. So remember, isolate the radical. A compound inequality, remember, you're working with the inside, this middle part. Subtract 11, divide by a -2. Now please remember, whenever you divide by a negative, you have to reverse the order of the signs. It's very important. Okay. All right. Now here's a question involving solving the compound inequality and understanding the different answers. So remember, this is interval notation. Parenthesis is not included like an open circle. Bracket is included like a closed circle. Okay, this question right here, yeah, very, very important. You isolate the radical and then you turn it into a compound inequality. That's very, very important. This one the same way, okay? Now, if the sign is greater, you turn it into an or, okay? So please be looking for a little explanation on a video on that. Distance formula, make sure you know it, you use it, do a good job with it. Midpoint formula, know it, use it, do a good job with it. Please remember this business about the circle. Remember this part on the right side is r squared, so be mindful of that. This has got to be very straightforward question right here. Remember, the radius over here is 4, okay? So be mindful. Okay, notice over here, radius is radical 3. Okay, some very straightforward questions here. Okay, and here, this is the general form of an equation of a circle, so make sure that you use complete the square procedure twice, grouping your x and y terms together and manipulating your numbers following the complete the square procedure. I think I had a song about that. All right, now remember on these part right here, you're going to substitute in the expression a minus 1 and for the x, then simplify. No shortcuts. Also, please remember on these graphs like number 61, if the graph extends through the plane, there really is an arrow at the end of that. There really is an arrow at the end of that. You can't see it on this problem, but there's a blue line going across here, so be mindful of that. Arrow at the end here. Okay, a domain, remember it can't have a 0 at the bottom. Domain can have a radicand that is negative. Slope, okay, this is about lines. Don't forget the different forms of a line. Actually, very, very straightforward questions right here. These are all very, very straightforward. Remember, parallel lines have the same slope, perpendiculars are negative reciprocals. All right, here's a basic question. Now remember, this is the absolute value function, and this means moved to the what? This means moved to the left 1. So be mindful of that. Again, try to remember how we talked about to manipulate the transformations of basic functions. There's another one right there. There's another one. Okay, very, very straightforward. Now remember the odd or the even. Okay, odd have odd powers of x, cannot have a constant. Even have even powers of x, can have a constant. Okay, so be mindful of that. Okay, pretty straightforward here. Difference quotient. Remember we did a couple problems on that. This one actually is a little more difficult, so ask about it if you need to. Here we're talking about composite functions, so that was very straightforward. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty straightforward. This is saying f of h of g. Alright, so we got to start with the 5, put it in g, then that into the h, and then that into the f. Okay, makes sense? Remember, you need to know negative b over 2a for these. Okay. Okay. Okay, this is very straightforward. This is just basically understanding the question and drawing a picture if you need to. Number 99 is a problem that you could use x and y. Ask about it. Happy to do it. It was also on your quiz. This one we did earlier with quadratics. Multiplicity. Remember, x plus 7 is the factor, negative 7 is the root, and the multiplicity is 2. Okay. All right, end behavior, we did go over that very, very well. Zeros, we went over that very, very well. Synthetic division, don't forget how to do that. Please make sure that you line up your coefficients in descending order of the exponents. Which reminds me, on 106 there's going to be some other zeros in there, right? Because there's not a 4th degree and so forth. All right, remainder theorem you got. Remainder theorem you got. Possible zeros. This is Queen Latifah's possibility book, so there you go right there. write a polynomial that meets the given conditions. And now these are kind of, you may or may not have got those in ALEKS, so you want to ask about one of those for sure in class. Again, zeros. If 3 minus 2i is a 0, right, the conjugate must be. Now this next section has to do with variation. We went over that. We did a good job with that. Make sure you write the relationship, include the k where it needs to be, and then find k, and then solve for the next instance or situation that is being presented to you. Okay, these are all inverse. Now remember, is this a one-to-one function or onto? What that means is, does it pass the vertical line test and the horizontal line test? So be mindful of that problem. Okay, here's how we want to find the inverse. Remember the steps: write y, switch x and y, solve for y, inverse f. This is actually a very straight question, so make sure you're good with the calculator. Using transformation is very, very important. And remember, you could use your calculator on that. Okay, so that is helpful. Here's another one of these questions with simple interest. Again, please ask me about that. I'd be happy to do that. This one everybody should be able to do. Compound interest. You need to know the formula, so be mindful of that as well. Okay. This is this is a radioactive decay problem. Please rewrite it in your own way if you need to make that make sense. Pretty straightforward question. You got to work at it. Okay. There's this amoxicillin. That was that thing I was talking to you about, my wife being sick over the holiday. All right, so now here's your log stuff. Very, very straightforward log, right? This is just extremely straightforward. This has been drilled into you. I think you got all of that stuff down pretty good. Here's some log equations. These, remember, you got to take the ln or log of both sides. They say natural log, so take the natural log of both sides. All right, we're coming down to a little bit toward the end here. Another log. Remember, you're stuck in a log jam, so you're going to move that forward to the other side and rewrite it as an exponential function. Also remember here there's common log, so that would be base 10. And here's another symptom. Not symptom, another system. Okay. Again, I gave them to you on that last quiz so that you'd be more comfortable with understanding how to work those out. This one you got to solve, so no shortcut there. And then here's two that you got to work out. Remember, we did this yesterday in class. Hopefully this makes sense to you, and with your work on the quiz you'll be okay. All right, so I'm going to pause on this for a second. Okay, so here's something that I want to remind you of. Remember, if I'm adding these together, this is the common denominator. Also, the formula for simple interest is, this is the simple interest. Okay, remember it's r times t. And now in this question, number 14, it's really a mixture problem. It's talking about you having $4,100 to invest. And so what I did is I wrote the problem this way without having to involve the two variables. That would be one way to work that problem. And that would be my suggestion. Okay, students, I'm having some serious issues with the software working properly, so this is just a reminder here. Square root of -1, that's I. This is very important right here. When you're solving an absolute value equation, remember you're making two other equations. When you're solving an absolute value inequality, the absolute value, get the absolute value by itself, less than, remember less than like hand, okay? It turns into a compound inequality right there. That's how you work that. And then here, if you have an absolute value inequality and it's a greater, right? Remember it's an or, and so you're going to have these two different inequalities to solve. Also, please remember that the formulas are not given to you on the test, so you do need to know this formula here as well as the shampoo formula. I'm going to give you some other advice in a moment. Okay, folks, this video production didn't turn as great as I wanted to, but it is something, better than nothing. I'll post this on CourseDen so that you have access to it and can review it before tomorrow morning. Hope it helps. Thank you. Bye.